For this rose, I'm gonna start with the center. Let me show you this before I start. This one was made on a styrofoam ball. It's a 1-inch styrofoam ball. And this one was made starting with that so that the center will have some shape to it. I do tend to make flowers flat. I tend to make them very large and very flat. So by starting with a ball, it kind of keeps me on track to keep the center of it a little bit deeper. You don't want to do something that is really, really large. You don't want to start with a 2-inch styrofoam ball because that's just not going to work. And this in the container said it was 15/16 of an inch. It seems very small, but anyway, the way that I wire these, I just take the wire and stick it directly through. I don't use any hot glue or anything because this is just faster. Then I make a little hook and pull it back down. So now the wire is in there, and to keep it from sliding back out, I bend it this way a little bit, then just do that. So now there's like an extra little bend in it. And then I press this part in there and then bend it down like that. Okay, so it's basically anchored on the top and on the bottom with a little hook shape. That will prevent it from moving around. And once you get the wafer paper around it, it's not going to move and it's not going to come out. To cover this, I start with this is a 1.5-inch paper cutter, just a round paper cutter. Well, actually it's this, just a paper punch, 1.5 inches. And I start with the smaller size to begin with and then work my way up to the larger ones. I'm just going to get that a little damp and put this on top of the ball. Now this is not going to stick. All right, you just want to kind of cover this up so that if anybody can see down inside the rose center, they're not going to see the styrofoam. But this is, it's like you're making it's a little hat, okay? It's not going to stick to the styrofoam. That's okay because these petals that we're putting on around it are going to keep it on there. And I've got 3, and these are made with the yellow watercolor paper that I made, and see that came off, but that's okay. And I'm going to put these so that the colored side is pointing out. These are going to be on the flower kind of surrounding this, and people are going to be able to see this side more. So if you have paper that has color on one side, it's not so obvious with this particular shade because it's so light, but you want to put the color on the outside, not facing inside. I'm just going to take this and wrap this around there and just press it down. And you just have to hold it in place for a second. It's going to stick to itself. It'll work. And I'm pretty much covering the whole thing at this point with the vodka. Now you can use water. You can use water if you don't want to use alcohol. You have to be careful, and see how I'm just peeling that around. You just have to be careful that you're not putting too much on there because vodka evaporates very quickly, and that's why we use vodka with wafer paper. But water works fine. You just have to be careful not to get it too wet. Okay, it doesn't evaporate as quickly. So you run the risk of just making your wafer paper too wet. And I'm really not putting that much on there. It looks like I am, but I'm really not. All right, so I'm gonna wrap this around. So I have 3 circles that I'm kind of bunching up down toward the bottom. And see, by bunching it up on the bottom, it's gonna kind of adhere to the shape of the little ball, and it's not gonna fall off. Because when wafer paper gets wet and it dries, the starch, it's just a starch, it's not really paper. So the starch makes it really stiff, and this is gonna be like a little capsule. It kind of encapsulates the styrofoam ball. It's not going to come off. And we've got the center. Okay, so that's how you do the centers with the ball in it. And then, see, the reason, I'm not sure where I'm holding this for the camera to see it, but the reason that you cover the first ball with the one little piece is so that if people see down on the inside of that, they don't see the styrofoam, they just see another piece that's the same color as this, so it looks normal. So that's the first step. You can take 3 more, just do 3 or 4 more punched out circles, the same size. At this point, you're still putting this so that it faces out. And at some point when the flower starts opening up, you're going to switch that around. But at this point, you still want the wafer paper to have the color on the outside here. So there's that, there's 1. I'm just going to do 4. And there's no real rule. I mean, people do 3, 5, 7, 9, but if you look at a real rose, I have never in my life seen a real rose that conformed to that. So just put as many as you need to get the look that you're wanting. I just cut out 4. I don't think I'll need 4 in this case. Okay, so there's the first set. And you can kind of manipulate this to keep them pointing in the right direction while they're kind of drying. Like this one is a little bit bunchy here because it's really wet and it's starting to melt. So I can manipulate that a little bit to make it stand out. And then when it dries, it'll have the same, it'll be round the right way. For the next part of this, I'm going to show how to make this a little bit larger and steam the petals. The next layer, I'm going to do 5 more of the smaller ones, but I've cupped them. I've just cut a little slit into the paper, and I'm going to just put a tiny bit of vodka there, and you can use water, that's fine. And I'm cupping this so that the color is on this side. I know it's really hard to see because it's a light color. I don't want to cup it so much that it's super, super curved because I want it to open up. I want this flower to be larger. If you take this and really do that, then it's, I don't know if you guys can see the contour, but you just want it to be a little bit overlapped. You want it to overlap just enough that it gives it a little bit of a contour and it's not completely flat. Okay, and I'm only doing that for 2 rows. These petals here, I didn't do that to because I didn't need to. It was easy enough to manipulate them without having to do that. Because this is dried out, it's a little stiffer. I'm going to put some vodka on this too. And then I'm just going to take these and I'm going to try to fit these around so that it starts to spread. It starts to spread the width of the flower out a little bit, okay? And if you do this when the inside part hasn't dried out, it's a lot easier. And I am putting this down kind of closer to the base of the flower because I'm going to steam this in a little bit. And I don't want this to be too tall. I don't want the petals all to be the same height. You want to drop some of them down so that they start to give you a little bit that's going to open up when you steam the flower. All right. And it is not wanting to stick because the inside part dried out overnight. So you might have trouble getting it to stick, that's okay. But see, as you put these on, they're cupped a little bit, it's natural, and it's actually easier if you do dry the inside because then you can really kind of press on that to get a good grip. Because I've cupped this layer by making them contoured, those are naturally going to fall out away from the center a little bit. Then I'm going to do 1 row of the larger ones. And see, just by doing that, it's going to start opening it up. And I have put this all the way down to the wire, on the back of the wire here. That's where that one is sitting. And you don't have to be real super careful about overlapping these any specific way. You're going to be steaming them, and that's how they're really going to open up. The good thing about wafer paper is that you don't have to wait for it to dry like gum paste. It pretty much grabs onto itself right away. You do want to be careful that you're not smashing the middle. I'm kind of pressing these down, but see, now I've got this done that way and the outside flower is opened up. I'm going to add 1 more row of petals and then I'm going to steam it. And we'll see how that looks. All right, I wanted to mention that when I'm adding this last row of petals, let me grab these, I'm not cupping these. I'm gonna do these in a different color so we can see them better. I'm not gonna cup these because they're just gonna sit and widen the flower. They don't need to be curved up to meet the center. I want them to be flatter as they go out. So I'm not even gonna bother cupping them. That's one less step. It saves you a little time. And we're actually gonna place these so that they overlap like this, and they're a little farther out, and that means not putting them all the way up to the center. Okay, so I'm just going to do this, and usually I have a styrofoam, like a styrofoam cake dummy, that I stick all the wires into as I'm working. I didn't grab one this time, but see how I'm not necessarily putting it all the way down to the stem, the base of the stem. But see, I just want the petals. I want the petals to be out a little farther. And it's okay to have them out a lot because you can always trim them off. Since it's wafer paper, it's easy to cut and you don't have to worry about that. So if they're a little too long, that's okay. It's better to have them too long than to not have them long enough. And you can just go back and fill this in. There's no rule about how many petals you have to have. I'm not doing the gum paste thing where I'm overlapping this one with the first one. It doesn't really matter. So that's what it looks like before I steam it. Now let's take it over to the stove and steam the flower. I am going to let this set up a little bit. It's still wet, so I want this to set up a little bit. It's usually a good idea to let these dry out before you steam them, just because it's adding more moisture to it, and if it's already damp, it might make it collapse and it might make it melt. So if you make these and then just let them sit overnight, then that is a good, or just for an hour, you know, it doesn't really have to be overnight. but that's good just to get them to dry out. And that's why I use the vodka, because it evaporates quickly, but you can use water. And if you see like this one looks like it's a little bit too big, if you see any spaces that you want to add more petals, you can do that and just adjust it, let it dry out, and then you go over and steam it. This one, and I use a pot on the stove, so just be careful if you use hot water on the stove because it will burn you. Just be careful. The point of steaming these flowers is not to make them look 100% botanically correct. You just want to give it a little bit of movement so that it looks nice on a cake. Just be aware that most people are going to look at this and go, oh my God, that's so beautiful. If it's on a cake, they're not going to come up and examine it. You just want to steam it to give it a little bit of movement and to make it look a little less flat and papery. The point of steaming them is just to give them a little movement, and you can see that these petals move around, and you can manipulate them while they're being steamed, and they'll pretty much set right where they are. All right, so if you have questions, please post them, leave a comment, give this video a thumbs up, and I will be back with another flower pretty soon.